Hello, students. A very good afternoon. So before we start the session, can you just type it in the chat box if my audio and the video is clear so that we can go on with the session? You can use the chat box to tell if you have any problems with audio or the video. Make it fast, students, so that we don't lose time, because last time we had some audio issues. Okay. So anyways, I have put the question in the chat box. So if you have any issues, you let me know, because you're taking a little bit of time. All right. So yeah, let's get to the session, people. So today we are going to start a new chapter, that is respiration in plants. Okay. It's very nice. It's a kind of biochemical in aspects when it comes to plant physiology. All right. So good afternoon. Yeah. Good afternoon. So I just wanted to know if my audio and video is clear. So you just clarify on that. So it will be very helpful for me. Um, so anyways, I'll get on with the session, people. Yeah. So I told you, right, it's mostly biochemical or biochemistry, I can tell you, rather than your physiological aspects. So anyways, let us start the session. And as usual, before we start the session, we have some quiz for you. Okay. So I have the first question for you. This is your first question. All the following regarding the role of xanthophylls and carotenoids in photosynthesis are correct, except they act as accessory pigments. Second one is their peak absorption is in blue and red regions of Vibgyor. They enable a wider range of wavelength of incoming light to be utilized for photosynthesis. They protect chlorophyll A from a of a chlorophyll A form of photooxidation. So here you have your options, okay? And unfortunately, you have to type your answer in the chat box, and you have 1 minute to solve this question, all right? Students from YouTube Live, you can also use the chat box to answer. I'll be, monitoring the YouTube as well. Okay, if you have any queries also, you can put it in the chat box. Okay. Come on, students. Because in the last class, we studied photosynthesis, isn't it? So it is very relative question, right? So you should be knowing by now. What are xanthophylls and what are carotenoids, and how are they right in all the aspects, except in what regard they're not responsible. Yes, we have an answer. Answer is 3. They enable a wider range of wavelength of incoming light to utilize for photosynthesis. So that is one of the answers we got. I'll give you another 10 seconds. So let us see if you have any answers. Time up, people. Okay. So what they're asking is, how are these accessory pigments responsible, but they're not responsible in one regard, okay, except. So they act as accessory pigments, absolutely right. So their peak absorption is in blue and red regions of Ibjar. Is it true, people? So do they absorb light in blue and red regions or below blue and red regions? That is why they're accessory pigments, isn't it? Correct, no? So they enable wider range of wavelengths of incoming light to be utilized for photosynthesis. Actually, they do this job also. They produce the chlorophyll A form of photo oxidation. This is also correct. So the peak absorption is in blue and red regions of Vibjar. Actually, no, I told you they are okay with lower wavelengths of light. So that is why this light harvesting complex, which are composed of several chlorophyll based xanthophylls and carotenoids, they help in actually enabling the plant to harvest as much light as possible. When you see chlorophyll A is equipped with harvesting the light that is between the region of blue and red. Okay, so that is the answer though. So our answer for these, except no, this is the answer. Their peak absorption is in blue and red regions of Vibjar. So here you have your second question. Dark reaction of photosynthesis are not actually totally independent of light, as the first option is the initial reaction occurs in the presence of light. Second one is the reaction will be inhibited by the presence of light. Next one, they can occur during the day as well. They utilize the product of the light reaction. So here is your options, and the question is here. So you can answer, and you have 1 minute to answer this question. So we have an answer already. Okay, give me a second. So we have 3. They can occur during the day as well. So anybody? Students, have you understood the question? So you can just break it down. Dark reactions of photosynthesis are not totally independent, right? Totally independent. They're not totally independent of light as. So they have given 4 options. Why they are not totally independent? That means they're dependent on light reactions. On what basis? Okay. So I'll give you 15 seconds. The others try to answer, and please try to answer. Jain Virajkot. Okay. And then we have Pune answered. Esmina. So please try to put your answers in the chat box. Okay, we have 5 seconds. And yes, 3. All right. So I'll end it. So let us get back to the question. They're telling about they're not independent, right? The dark reactions are not independent, but they are dependent on light reactions. They are dependent on light reaction. Why? Because the light reactions byproducts are ATP. Okay. I think the pen ink I have to change. Okay, because some people cannot see. Give me a second. Yeah. So they usually the byproducts of light reactions are what? ATP and NADPH, isn't it? ATP and NADPH, which are coming from the light reaction, are used in the dark reactions, right? So our answer would be, you see your 4th option, they utilize the products of the light reaction, correct? No. So that is why they are not so dependent on, they're very dependent on the light reactions, and they're not totally independent. Okay. So yeah. So the dark reactions of photosynthesis are dependent on light reaction because they utilize the products of light reactions. What are the products of light reactions? We have ATP and NADPH, right? So fine. So let us start our today's chapter, that is respiration in plants. Fine. Before we go into the details of this topic, let us understand generally what is respiration and why do all the organisms have to respire. So if you see any living organisms, whether it is unicellular to complex multicellular organisms, all of us breathe, right? All of us breathe, and during breathing, we have the process called as exchange of gases. So whenever we have a need for exchange of gases, there must be some of the important biochemical reactions happening within our body. That is why for us it is very, very compulsory to breathe, right? First, we are not talking about respiration, we are talking about breathing. So when we talk about breathing, when we look at humans, humans have lungs, a pair of lungs, and there are accessory respiratory organs which help in the process of breathing, mechanical process, that is taking the air in and giving it out. But what about the rest of the organisms? Do all organisms have to breathe? This is the first question. Yes, they have to breathe. And why do they have to breathe? The breathing process is essential because during the breathing process, we fix something called as oxygen into our tissues or cells. So as we fix the oxygen into our cells or tissues, there is another biochemical process that is happening where this oxygen is utilized, okay, for the process of production of energy molecules. All right. So if you take any examples of, for example, if you take plants, or if you take animals, or if you take any cellular organisms, this process of exchange of gases, right? So they happen in a different ways and different levels. For example, you might take examples of anaerobic organisms. So even if anaerobic organisms are strictly surviving in the absence of oxygen, even they have the requirement of oxidizing this glucose molecules or whatever the energy molecules for the formation of energy. For that, they depend upon enzymes that have the capacity to oxidize. If you look at higher organisms, we use directly oxygen, right? Whereas when it comes to plant system also have a very high requirement. I mean, like a strict requirement for, not high requirements, but they have a strict requirement for the oxygen. Correct? No. But let us look at oxygen levels, that is requirement of oxygen levels compared to animals. If you see plants don't require so much of oxygen like that of animals, okay? So they utilize very, very less amount of oxygen comparatively. Only during the photosynthesis process, there is high demand for this particular oxygen, okay, or gaseous exchange. Whereas in the normal process, compared to animals, the breathing process or the exchange of gases that is happening in the plants is far, far less compared to that of animals. Animals, we burn a lot of energy, okay, to keep our body heat, whereas plants do not do that. That is why the demand for oxygen is quite very, very less. So what is respiration? So respiration is a process of oxidizing food materials, okay? So we know that all the organisms are highly specialized for making energy molecules. We understood in the process of photosynthesis that our plant molecules use carbon dioxide molecules to fix, okay, in the form of glucose, and the glucose is later converted into sucrose, right? So when they do this process of conversion of carbon dioxide into glucose, glucose into sucrose, now we have energy source. Okay, this is a food source. Whereas this food source have to be used up to form energy molecules. And how do we convert this into energy molecules? And this happens by oxidation of food materials. So oxidation of food materials is breaking down. For example, if you have glucose molecule, our glucose molecule is made up of C6, right? There are 6 carbon atoms. So we basically break the bonds of the glucose. We convert this 6 carbon atom glucose into 3 carbon atom, pyruvates, okay, in some cases, or lactic acid, or any other byproducts. As we convert this complex molecule into simpler molecules by the oxidation process, okay, there what we do is whatever the energy that is derived during the process, okay, it is not one step process. Usually the conversion of this food, oxidation of food material into ATP, it's not one step process. So it is a multi-step process, and all living organisms undergo multi-step process because they want to make sure that whatever the energy is liberated by breaking down these bonds through oxidation is slowly converted into currencies of energy. So this currencies of energy, we call it as ATP molecules, correct? No. For all living organisms, the currency of energy is what? ATP molecules. So by the process of converting this complex molecule into simpler molecules, we derive something called as ATP molecules, right? So this ATP molecules are currency in all living organisms for any process you take, for growth, okay, for repair, for cell division, for reproduction, okay, for conversion of substance amino acids into proteins, right? Or small lipid molecules into, if you want to construct into plasma membrane. So we know what is this process, correct? No. So when we look at this respiration process, we can just simply put it as it is a catabolic process, right? So what is catabolism? We have a complex food materials, and we convert them into simpler food molecules. I mean like simpler substances, okay, through cellular respiration, correct? No. So what is so the overall process of oxidation of these materials and production of ATP can be called as cellular respiration. So for the cellular respiration to even happen, correct? No. What is required? The oxygen is required, or oxidation of this complex food material is required. Okay, so let us see how that process happens. Now, during the process of this conversion of these compounds, complex food material, into simpler products, byproducts, I told you it is a multi-step process, right? So this multi-step process, there is, for example, glucose is converted into glucose 6-phosphate, glucose 6-phosphate is converted to glucose 1,6-biphosphate, okay, something like this. Okay, there is a gradual conversion of this complex material into different byproducts, and these byproducts we call it as respiratory substrates. Okay, for example, pyruvate can be called as a respiratory substrate. Okay, so if you see in the overall aspect of respiration, we only talk about carbohydrates as a major component to give us energy. So it's not same in the all cases, because apart from carbohydrates, we even use proteins, fats, and other organic acids for the production of energy. So where does the cellular respiration take place? We know that the photosynthesis process takes place in the chloroplast, correct? No, it takes place in the chloroplast. But the respiratory process happens in two important locations in the plant cells. One is in the cytoplasm and the other one is in the mitochondria. So these two regions are very, very important regions where this respiration process is happening. Okay. If you see in many of the organisms like animals, it is in mitochondria that this respiration is happening. Fine. Now, as I said, the energy that we have after breaking down of this complex molecule is in the form of ATP, and ATP is again phosphorylated into ADP and phosphate. By breaking down the bonds between the ATP molecules, we derive energy. So fine. I told you that for the respiration process, there is a requirement for gaseous exchange, correct? No? So if you look at us, we have a very elaborate respiratory mechanism where there is a constant exchange of gases. But when it comes to plant systems, how do they exchange gases? If you see the plant structures, every single part of the plant or a tree requires this gaseous exchange. Okay, fine. If they require the gaseous exchange, we know that the gaseous exchange happens through stomata. So when the gaseous exchange happens through stomata, the problem is solved, isn't it? But absolutely not. Why? Because the distance of transport of these gases have to be tremendously high, correct? No, if it has to move from the shoot or the leaves all the way till the root system, it would be a very large distance to be traveled for a gas. And if you see the rate of diffusion of gas molecules in the plant system, it is very, very low, correct? No. So when it is very low and the distance is very large, then you can see that the possibility of the gas that is absorbed through the stomata and getting transported all the way till the root is very, very less. It's not possible, correct? No. But even if it is possible, it is very minimal and it is not sufficient for the plant structures. That is why the plant body is designed in such a way that the living cells, most of the living cells that have the demand for this oxygen, they are in direct contact with the outer environment. Okay, like that is, they have the direct gaseous exchange. How does this happen? So if you observe the bark of the tree, okay, or the stem, or even the root structures, okay, So now what happens, these outermost layer of this, what do you call, the bark of these plants, they have these pits called as lenticels. So these lenticels which are present, correct, no, they promote this gaseous exchange. Okay, lenticels are present. What about the interior? For example, if I take a cross section of your stem, okay, the cross section of a stem reveals that there are regions that are very outside, that is in the peripheral region, and there are regions that are towards the center. Okay, so if you see the arrangement of cells at the middle or at the core of your stem, it is composed of mostly dead cells, or which are not respiratorily active cells. Okay, whereas if you see the peripheral regions, usually in the very the regions which are very close to the outermost regions are filled with parenchymatous cells, right? So if you know the characteristics of parenchymatous cells, we know that they are very loosely arranged cells, correct? So these loosely arranged cells, they are almost at the peripheral regions, that helps in the diffusion of gases from the outside, from the outside environment through lenticels. You understood my point, right? So usually what happens, the dead cells are towards the center, and their role is to provide the mechanical support, whereas all these living cells and active cells, respiratorily active cells, they are at the periphery, and they can easily diffuse gases from the atmosphere directly. And also these cells are very loosely arranged. So this is how the exchange of gases that happens in plants. And as I said, the demand for this gases exchange is very, very low in plants compared to that of animals. Okay, so that is why they are able to compensate this required rates of these gases with very minimal amount of diffusion, that too happening by direct means. Okay, it is not happening through transportation. All right, so fine. So as I said, okay, these are the points. I'm sorry about it. Okay, as I said, each plant have their own way, each part of the plant, they have to exchange their own gas, so the transport is very, very limited. So this as I said, this is the same points it's given. Okay, give me a second. I'll have to move this. Yeah, now we can see this. Okay, so when we see the leaves are doing maximum gas exchange during the photosynthesis, and moreover oxygen that is released, okay, during the photosynthesis, it comes from carbon dioxide, right? Most of the oxygen that the plants require, it is coming from carbon dioxide, because we observed that in C4 plants, what happens, the carbon dioxide will help in, one second people, yeah, the carbon dioxide will basically help in providing the oxygen for these plants, okay, for these leaves. Fine. So if we have to just summarize the overall reaction of this respiration, so in a generic sense, what is happening, the glucose molecule or the energy molecule or the food source, when it is oxidized in the presence of oxygen, right, so that will result in carbon dioxide. Okay, that will result in release of 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and it also gives very important energy in the form of ATP molecules, correct? No, but when we talk about the catabolism of glucose, right, all the energy that is liberated during the glucose, it is goes out, it should not be wasted in the form of heat. That is why, see, for example, if I start breaking down the glucose and directly convert into ATP energy, what happens? Majority of the energy will be lost in the form of heat, isn't it? So as I said before, that during the catabolism of glucose, what is happening? It is a stepwise process. So, and this stepwise process and slowly converting this glucose into reduced carbon molecules. Like for example, we have 6 carbon here, and it will be converted into 3 carbon atom molecules. So during this process, what happens slowly as the conversion happens, during the conversion, the energy that is released is stored in the form of ATP molecules. Okay, so that is one thing. Now, when it comes to respiration, as I said, oxygen is must, and oxygen is utilized for the respiration, and carbon dioxide and water and energy is released as a byproducts of respiration. But when you see some of the organisms cannot, okay, or they are adapted to the environment where there is absolutely no oxygen, or they are facultative anaerobes. Well, what are facultative anaerobes? they don't want oxygen compulsorily to survive, but they depend on oxygen for respiration. Okay. Whereas when you talk about strict anaerobes, they live in completely lack of oxygen environment. And most of us are, very strict aerobes, correct, right? So based on the differences that is happening with respect to the demand or the requirement of this oxygen, now one of the important reactions that we have as a catabolic process of glucose is called as glycolysis. Now, what is glycolysis? As I said, glycolysis is a pathway, okay? And in this pathway, whenever there is low requirement, whenever there is low oxygen levels, okay? So basically, the enzymatic oxidative process takes place. That means the enzymes are performing the role of oxidizing this glucose molecule to convert them into pyruvate, okay? Whenever there is low glucose and the oxidation process, whenever there is low oxygen and the oxidation process is done by the series of enzymes, okay, and it will result in the formation of energy molecules, okay, and this process is called as glycolysis, which is popularly known as EMP pathway. Okay, so what is glycolysis or EMP pathway? In this glycolysis, as I said, glucose molecule, which is made up of 6 carbon atom, is broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid or pyruvate, which is made up of 3 carbon atom. Okay, and especially I told you, whenever there is accurate or deficiency of oxygen or complete absence of oxygen, this glycolysis happens. This is a very important point you have to remember. Okay, but who does the job of this oxygen? Enzymatic oxidation will take place. Okay, several enzymes participate in this who perform the same role as the oxygen, and this oxidation will result in the breakdown. Okay, so let us see what happens. And why do we call this glycolysis as EMP pathway? Why? Because before it was termed as glycolysis, which is a Greek word basically. Glyco means sugar, lysis means breakdown. Okay, so before this glycolysis was coined, this scheme was given by these 3 scientists. Who are those? See, here we have E, correct? No, Emden, that is for E, M. Okay, Meyerhof, that is M, and P, Parnas. Okay, we have 3 people. That is why we have it as EMP pathway. And these scientists were responsible for illustrating the process of glycolysis. Okay, fine. Whenever we talk about anaerobes, I told you glycolysis happens in the absence of oxygen, isn't it? See, people, even in us, glycolysis happens when, for example, let us assume that you're running. Okay, whenever you're running, your body cannot fixate the amount of oxygen that your tissues require because your tissues are burning more energy. At that point, what happens? The oxygen demand is very, very high, but your body is not able to give oxygen, correct? No? At that point, also glycolysis happens. But when you talk about anaerobes don't have any other alternate pathway to get energy. The only way they get this energy is through what process? Glycolysis process. Okay. So next one. Excuse me. 1 second. Fine. So let us observe the process of glycolysis with respect to plants. Now, if you look at the plants during the photosynthesis reaction, okay, during the process of photosynthesis, we understood that the plants produce energy. That is, they prepare glucose. After they prepare glucose, the glucose is actually converted into sucrose, right, which is a disaccharide. That is a photosynthetic, that is a photosynthetic byproduct. Which one? The sucrose. So once we have sucrose as the stored energy, first of all, sucrose is not directly utilized, okay, as a source for glycolysis, right? So why? Because sucrose is a disaccharide and it has to be converted into monosaccharide because the starting material for the glycolysis is glucose or fructose. Let us see what happens. First, what do? We have sucrose, and sucrose is converted into glucose and fructose by an enzyme called as invertase. Is very, very important. Okay, so this invertase enzyme, what it is doing, it is breaking down or converting breaking down sucrose into glucose and fructose, and the name of the enzyme is invertase. Okay, and we have what? We have 2 monosaccharides, isn't it, which are ready for what pathway? Glycolytic pathway, or we also call it as glycolysis. Fine. So now when we have glycolysis, the glycolysis starts with glucose, as I said. Now the glucose and the fructose derivatives in the beginning of the cycle of the glycolysis, what they are done, they are phosphorylated. Okay. What is phosphorylation? A phosphate group is added for this glucose molecule at the 6th carbon atom. Okay. So glucose is 6 carbon atom, isn't it? So we have carbon, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have 6. So see, 6 carbon atom, and then the 6th carbon atom we add a phosphate. See, that is why we have, after phosphorylated, what do we have? We have glucose 6 phosphate, correct? No. So once it is phosphorylated, okay, now this phosphorylation process is done by an enzyme called as hexokinase. Remember these names of enzymes, very, very important. Okay. Once it is phosphorylated by hexokinase, there is one more enzyme called as isomerase. So this isomerase, what it will do, it will convert this glucose 6 phosphate into fructose 6 phosphate. Okay. Once we have fructose 6 phosphate, now the subsequent steps of this glucose metabolism will take place further by around 10-step process. Okay. It is a 10-step process where the entire catabolism of this glucose will take place. Okay. Can we study this 10-step process very quickly? Okay. Because we have only 9 minutes. All right. So initially we have glucose, as I said, which is a 6 carbon atom. So as I told, it is first, yeah, 1 second. Sir, please show the last slide. Okay, 1 second, 1 second. Yeah. Is it visible? Or should I move this taskbar? 1 second. Yeah, I think it should be visible now. Please take down the names of the enzymes, very important people. Okay. So can I move on? Okay, I need to repeat. So as I said, the beginning of the glycolysis, before we start the glycolysis process in plants, okay, remember the process of photosynthesis. What happened in photosynthesis? After the conversion of glucose, in most of the cases, the glucose is converted into storage molecule as sucrose, isn't it? The energy is stored in the form of sucrose, correct? No, in plants. So once it is stored as sucrose, now again we have to use this sucrose for the formation of, for the production of energy, right? So what happens? This carbohydrate, that is the sucrose that is stored in the plant cells, so it is converted. See, sucrose is converted into glucose and fructose, because when sucrose is a disaccharide. Okay, so if you break down sucrose, it will give rise to two monosaccharides. One is glucose, other one is fructose. And this particular reaction is done by which enzyme? Invertase is an enzyme. Okay, invertase enzyme will convert the sucrose into glucose and fructose. After we have monosaccharides, then we can proceed the following glycolysis reaction. So the very important steps of glycolysis reaction starts with glucose. So once we have glucose here, okay, the glucose is converted into glucose 6 phosphate. So what I was telling is the glucose is having, okay, how many carbon atoms? 6 carbon atom, correct? No. At the 6th carbon atom, a phosphate group is added, and this reaction is called as what? Phosphorylation. Okay. Once we have phosphorylated the glucose into glucose 6 phosphate, and this process is done by or it is actually what do you tell catalyzed by this enzyme called as hexokinase. Okay, hexokinase converts glucose into glucose 6 phosphate. What is this glucose 6 phosphate? Nothing. For a glucose molecule at the 6th position, you are adding one phosphate molecule, as simple as that. Okay, once we have glucose 6 phosphate, it is glucose, isn't it? Now the glucose is converted to fructose. Now we know that fructose is an isomer of glucose, right? They have the same chemical formula, but they have different structure, correct? So this process of conversion of glucose into fructose, right? So glucose 6 phosphate became fructose 6 phosphate. So there is an enzyme called as isomerase which do this job. So once we have fructose 6 phosphate, so it is also a step, it is the first two important steps of glycolysis, I can tell. Okay, and followed by these reactions, we have 10-step reaction. Okay, and we can study from here on. Did you understand? Whoever asked the doubt, sorry, I will read out the name. It is Ankola. JNV Ankola, did you understand? Please confirm. Yes. Is Ankola near Gokarna? I mean, like, I'm confused. Later we will talk about it. It's not correct. So anyways, yes, thank you. So let's go ahead with the glycolysis process. Okay, we have 5 minutes, people. Let us try to just move on with this topic, and then we will see. I will repeat it again in the next class. All right. So first ingredient is glucose, as I said, and I told you glucose is converted to glucose 6-phosphate by the addition of one phosphate molecule. Where do we get this one phosphate molecules? We have to spend one currency. Okay, one money. What is our money? ATP is our currency. When ATP is spent, what is happening here? ATP is broken down into ADP plus phosphate, isn't it? So this phosphate gets attached to your glucose. And who is doing this job? Hexokinase, isn't it? Once we have hexokinase converting this glucose into glucose 6-phosphate, and here we spent, okay, I'll write it here. Here, what do? We spent one molecule of ATP. Okay. Next, after glucose 6-phosphate, we have, it is converted into fructose 6-phosphate. All right. So this fructose 6-phosphate, you see, this is isomerized, correct? No? Glucose and fructose are isomers. So to convert glucose into fructose, isomerase is an enzyme. All right. So isomerase will come and helps in conversion of glucose 6-phosphate into fructose 6-phosphate. After we have fructose 6-phosphate, again, one more ATP molecule have to be spent. Why we are doing, why are we spending one more, phosphate molecule? Because see, I told you fructose is also made up of 6 carbon atom, isn't it? See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. First, initially, we had one phosphate molecule at the 6th carbon atom. Now, again, we are adding one more phosphate molecule at the 1st carbon atom. So, 1, 6. Got it? So, fructose 6-phosphate is converted into fructose 1,6 bisphosphate. Okay? Or biphosphate. By what? See, again, the ATP is spent and ADP is generated. And through ADP, what are we getting? One phosphate molecule. Got it? So, we had glucose. It became glucose 6-phosphate. Glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate. Fructose 6-phosphate is converted to fructose 1,6 bisphosphate. By this time, we have spent 2 molecules of ATP. Okay. So you have to remember that. Now, very important steps happens. Till now, investment happened. We have put money, okay, in the form of ATP molecules. Now it is our time to gain money. Okay. This is called as returns. Okay. After investment, we need returns, isn't it? Let us see what happens in returns. First of all, fructose 1,6 bisphosphate is actually broken down into 3 carbon atom molecules. Okay. So what is this 3 carbon atom molecule? One is called as dihydroxyacetone phosphate, and the other one is called as 3-phosphoglyceraldehyde. Okay. I will repeat again. Fructose 1,6 bisphosphate, which is containing 6 carbon atoms, is broken down into 3 carbon atom molecules. Okay. So what are those 2 important 3 carbon atom containing molecules? One is called as dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Okay. Hold on. Time over. Okay, people. I'm extremely sorry. There is still 1 minute. I didn't steal your time. All right. We can end this session now and we can continue in the next class. And note down your doubts if you have any doubts with respect to, because it's very important chapter when it comes to understanding certain aspects. Anyways, you note down your doubts and we can repeat in the next class and we can discuss. Okay. Thank you very much. And you can leave the session. Bye-bye.